I'm thrilled that you guys are going to have the opportunity to hear from our next speaker. Amanda and I met her back in May and came home on the flight, not able to even, our feet couldn't even touch the ground after hearing her story, and we knew we needed to bring her to our area. We knew that God had prepared our church, and the timing was right, and He had brought our church on a journey to be able to hear her message about the unadoptable. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Kimberly Smith. She's the co-founder and the author, well, the co-founder and president of Make Way Partners, but she's also the author of, I would say, the best book I have ever read. I would lie in bed at night and read until 3 in the morning, and Jimmy would turn at me and say, "What are you doing?" And I would say, "I cannot put this book down." So if you have not purchased this book yet, please do. This is not because, yes, please purchase this book. It will knock your socks off. It will knock your socks off. It's unbelievably well written. It is the best book I've ever read, and Passport Through Darkness is available at the table, at the Make Way Partners table in the hallway. So it's with pleasure that I introduce Kimberly L. Smith.
Years ago, I read a book based upon Churchill and Abraham Lincoln's speaking style. And one of the first things that it said was one of the biggest mistakes that speakers make is to stand up and open their talk giving 5 minutes of praise and platitude to whoever invited them, whoever hosted them, whoever helped them get along their way. It said it totally distracts from the power of the message that you want to deliver. So I have followed that rule ruthlessly, even in my husband's anger, that sometimes I don't have him stand up when he's with me and introduce him, because I know it does distract from my message. But today we're here for something bigger than just my message, and I have to say that in all of the adoption workshops and seminars and talks that I've been to, today has been the most thorough, not flashy, but the most thorough, well-informed. The talk that I heard this morning, step by step, on the phases, the process to go through, including some of the hard things. Like, I wanted to just stand up and shout when you said, make sure that you don't forget humility, and that we have our stopping points, and at some point you may have to refer a family to professional counselors and therapists outside of help. We cannot all be a specialist in every area. And so I really applaud the work that is going on here. I'm so thankful to partner with this group of believers mobilizing the body of Christ. So now, we'll pretend like I just stood up. My first time into Darfur, Sudan, a small group of us Khawajas gathered around a gnarled old man, loosely bound in leathered skin that was far too large for his emaciated body. We asked him intimately personal and deeply painful questions about his life in the dead zone of genocide. Our minds reeled frantically, searching for a way to assimilate his story. Then he pierced our hearts. His leathered lips barely parted as he said, "You've asked me many questions. May I ask you just one?" Although his body bore witness to both his age and abuse, he spoke with the dignity and composure of an Indian chief, and his request seemed more than fair. My parents were killed because they would not deny Christ. I've lost my brothers, my sisters, and children because of this faith. My wife and I alone survive after so many losses. And we're surrounded by millions of orphans for whom your government says adoption is not an option, as well as my government. And we are powerless to help them. I've heard that America is filled with many, many Christians, and that you too are a people of faith. So can you tell me why? Why have your people sat by watching my people suffer under this persecution for more than 5 decades? And now it has spread even to the Muslims in Darfur and the Nuba Mountains, not because of their faith, but because of the color of their skin. Yet this is the first time that any of you have ever sat with us or even asked about the plight of orphans among us. A chilly silence broke through the heat of that day, cooling the arrogance of we Americans and freezing our curious questions. I still shudder with no small dose of grief and godly shame every time I consider all the lost lives of all those wasted years. Why? Why do we sit on the sidelines in padded pews or mega stadium seating, singing hymns and praise choruses, knowing that there is a violent kingdom war raging against the most vulnerable and lonely orphan in our world, this kingdom world, right outside our pretty windows? Sometimes the way we do Christianity reminds me of the horror movies that I used to watch when I was a teenager. The scarier the better for me back then. I think I loved those movies partly because they were an escape from my real-time worries, and partly because something inside of me knew there was a real world out there that was a whole lot darker, more evil and ominous than the self-centered worries that consumed my childish thoughts. One of the most haunting movies I ever watched during this period was Dawn of the Dead. If you haven't seen it, I don't recommend it. In this horrible movie, the bodies of the dead could not rest. Instead, just moments after death occurred, a heinous reanimation took place. The corpse would raise up and roam the earth, tearing life and limb from all who drew breath. It's easy to see how that particular evil is paralleled to Satan roaming our earth today. What might not be quite so easy for us to see is how pervasive a response is represented here from our modern day church. In the movie, instead of combating evil, most people wanted to barricade themselves inside their homes and let the evil roam freely outside as long as they and their families were cloistered safely inside. At one point, a naive man who had just recently been introduced to the undead cries out, "Why? Why is this evil happening?" Another man, an old veteran at fighting the evil, answers something like, "Hell is full, and so evil is overspilling across the earth." Sometimes I feel as though our modern day church builds her theology directly from these sorts of B-rated horror flicks. We seem to be saying, well, hell is flooding across the earth, bad things happen, I just pray it doesn't get too close to home. I'll push a chef robe across my front door. I'll stockpile plenty of food and water and supplies. That way, nothing bad will get in, and I won't go outside because it's dangerous out there. Now contrast that to the way of living that Jesus dreams for us, for his church in Matthew 16:18. He says, "And now I'm going to tell you who you are, who you really are. You are Peter, a rock. This is the rock on which I will put my church together, a church so expansive with energy that not even the gates of hell will be able to keep it out." Our story, our calling, our purpose for being here today reminds me of a story tucked in the pages of 2 Samuel chapter 23. Mark Golly wrote a book outlining these pages, and if you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it. I'll read that passage for you. "And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds. He struck down 2 powerful men of Moab. He also chased a lion into a pit on a day when snow had fallen, and he killed the lion. And he struck down an Egyptian, a handsome man." I always have to stop here to say, I agree. It would be a whole lot harder to kill a handsome man than it would be another one. The Egyptian had a spear in his hand, but Benaiah went down to him with only a staff and snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. These things did Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and won a name beside the 3 mighty men. He was renowned among the 30, but he did not attain to the 3. And David set him over his bodyguard. This is our heritage. This is the stock from which we come. Imagine a lion terrorizing an entire village and everyone shutting themselves inside, afraid to go out to the local well and draw drinking water for their children. Benaiah steps forward and says, "Enough of this!" And he chases after the lion until the lion thought surely he had won home court advantage by leaping into a pit where Benaiah would be so cornered he would turn tail and run. But while Benaiah lacked the thick protective hide and switchblade claws for climbing slippery walls or slaying opponents, he had something the lion didn't count on. He had a love for his God and a love for the people of his God. And he would risk everything he had, including his very life, to storm that pit and save those people. And Benaiah didn't even rank among the 3 most valiant of David's men who did even greater things. These men are the root from which we sprout. They're the ones who stomp around in our dreams, giving us crazy ideas, like flying straight into lawless lands ravaged by run-amok warlords, snatching the orphans straight from the hands of slave raiders, brothel keepers, and genocidal maniacs. They give us dreams that only lion chasers dare to dream. Since my husband, Milton, is an insulin-dependent diabetic and is not able to travel to Sudan, for the first several years, I went to Darfur alone. I worked with our indigenous director, James Lualatak. It was there that we had a squat of land on the cusp of the Sahara Desert, but no buildings yet, save one tubal to store food. For weeks or months at a time, I worked in the bush or far up in the desert of Darfur by day and slept under the open stars with hundreds of orphans by night. Those years are both the most beautiful and ominous days and nights of my life. One night, I sat up very late, even with the sun long down. My thermometer still registered well above 120 degrees, and I just couldn't imagine sleeping. Lualatak had not yet returned from what he called his security rounds. Having no guards and only a thatch fence, which goats, dogs, and hyenas were constantly pushing through, it somehow made Lualatak feel better to survey the outer perimeter of our acreage each night before he laid down. Finally, a breeze brazed the desert floor, and I took it as a sign that sleep might magically blow my way. I stretched my sweaty body flat upon my cot, hoping to catch both the breeze and the sleep that I prayed it carried. It was one of those black nights where the moon hides itself in some unknown place. The stars were brilliant, but from their high tower position offered little visual aid without the moon. I prayed and studied their pattern until something like nodding off lulled me into a deeper rest. Just when I was no longer conscious of anything in this world, terrible screams jolted me from my slumber. My first instinct was to clamor for the stick that I kept at my side, which I often relied upon to chase away hyenas or other wild things that broke through our grass fence during the night. But as I rose, stick in hand and hoisted high above my head, I heard the scream again. And then I realized I heard no cackling, growling, or tearing of limbs. And so I knew it would not be hyenas that I opposed on this night. As panic threatened to overtake me, I worked to steady myself and discern from where the noise came. The blackness of night pressed in so thickly upon me, I couldn't even see the stick my own hands held. The troubling noise still came, but it was no longer a scream, more like a distant commotion, a rustling in the wind. I stumbled, slowly turning my head this way and that, like a receiver trying to find the signal sender. With my stick raised shoulder level, I ran toward the rustling, prepared to fight off the unknown maker of noise. Less than halfway through our compound, my feet tangled in roots that my eyes couldn't see, and I fell upon my own stick, puncturing my shoulder. Up again, but with my stick a bit lower this time, I charged once more. Only now, I no longer heard even the rustling. I stopped again, working to train my ears to catch the sound, seeking direction. Nothing. Cautiously, I headed slowly into the direction that I'd last sensed the rustling. The night breeze soothed an abrasion upon my cheek from the fall and carried a chilly silence. I walked into the breeze, afraid of what my feet might stumble upon next, but there was no turning back now. Passing the sprawling mahogany tree under which Lualatok housed his orphan church, I knew I was approaching the back end of our land. I walked all the way to our dried grass fence, playing my hands across it, seeking a thin patch where goats or wilder beasts had broken through before. I found one, pulled it open, and squeezed my body through. Scanning left and right, my eyes caught a flicker ahead. Earlier, I'd given Lualatok my headlamp to make his rounds. He was the only one I knew of who had such a torch. It must be Lualatok, I told myself. A glimmer of hope rose within me, and I moved toward the light. Long-legged, Lualatok covered his ground more quickly than me. We met just shy of the center of the land that stretched between us. Without speaking a word, we read the well-matched dread in one another's eyes. By the light of the headlamp, which Lualatok now held in his hand, both our faces winced at the same time as our ears trained in on the whimper. I hooked my arm in the crook of his as we ran toward the painful sound just a few yards away now. In the dim light of my torch on that moonless night, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Shredded piles of rags don't bleat and groan. But then the pile moved just a hair, and I knew it was a child. I knelt down in the dirt beside her, carefully peeling back enough of the bloody cloth clinging to her broken body to find her little head. If I'd seen the child in our village before, I couldn't recognize her now with all the lacerations pocking her face. Her little body lay twisted on the desert floor, and her right arm, judging at the angle from which it protruded, had to be broken. Lualatok stood over me, wailing, "No, God! No, not another little one! You must stop this, God! I really mean it! You must stop this evil! Where are you, God?" Lualatok couldn't bring himself to touch the broken child. I worked futilely to limit the pain I inflicted upon her as I pulled her into the nook of my lap. With the small child in my arms, Lualatok helped me to stand, and he put his arms around me, steadying me as we walked back to my cot. I had no medical training to interpret what I saw, but from the way her little legs splayed, I feared our little angel's hips had been broken during the brutal rape. Lualatok brought me a dirty bucket of water, the best he could find from our well. And I did the best I could do to gently wash Angel as she passed in and out of consciousness. It wasn't until the light of morning that I saw the large chunk torn from her outer thigh. That explained why she was out so late to begin with. She'd probably been forced out to find food or water some days before and had been bitten by some sort of wild beast and then was unable to make it home. Unless, of course, she was one of the 2 million fatherless, unadoptable orphans in Sudan who had no home to return to. I gave Angel some broad-spectrum antibiotics that I had tucked away in my backpack. Lualatok went to the commissioner, seeking vengeance for the rape and begging for help to find the rabies vaccine. Sudanese-style vengeance came quickly to the Muslim man believed to have committed the rape. The cries for rabies vaccine fell flat upon the deaf ears of a blind world. Angel's fever soared to 106 degrees, and in the days to follow, she died. I can't really say from what, but I can say why. The why is because she lived in a lawless land of poverty, slavery, and genocide, which too much of the world doesn't even want to consider. Even the few of us who will entertain foster care or adoption, it's a whole other realm. To provide care for a child, you will never have the personal gratification to meet, hold, raise, celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, weddings. But we, brothers and sisters, are from the root of lion chasers who are called to leap into the pit and slay the beasts that prey upon these children. Sometimes the beasts we chase are malaria, dysentery, cholera, kala-azar, rabies, and meningitis. Other times there are too young pregnancies, rape trauma, slave raiders, hyenas, or two-legged beasts who will surely tear them apart as any feral thing in the desert. These are beasts that we can defeat, but make no mistake, this is war. It's not nice. It's not pretty. It's kingdom war, and the victory will not come without valiant men and women jumping into the pit, wielding their spears against our adversary, the one orchestrating all beasts we chase. In this very room, God has provided through you not just one, but at least 3 spears. In your first hand, He's given you the spear of training and education. Proverbs 25:2 says, "It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search them out." God has granted you the glory of kings through the gifts of books, the internet, and formal education. Honed well, these tools provide miraculous insight into many of the mysteries hidden deep behind the veil of evil we lift. Used well, our education is a ferocious weapon against the beast we face. In our second hand, we hold the no less powerful spear of humble service. The willingness to learn from the wisdom and holiness that suffering has given to those whom we serve. Witnessing, honoring, simply sitting with, spending time with, submitting to, and learning from the wealth of a suffering people such as the Sudanese and their experience of loss, pain, and darkness will make us mighty warriors indeed. Finally, there is the spear which we cannot cling to, carry, or wield, but that only has power when we lay it down. And that is the spear of our financial resources. Just as God has given you the glory of kings, He has also given you the treasure of kings. He calls us, equips us, and expects us to carry on in this same insane obedience until either there are no more orphans sleeping fatherless and homeless in trees, barely escaping slave raiders, warlords, and genocidal maniacs, or until He returns, forever locking the gates of hell and ending its bleeding over across our earth. After Lualatak and I buried our little angel, we sat in loose, rocky soil beside her grave, crying and talking a while. He asked me the same question I'd heard him scream when we first found our little angel. "Mama Kimberly," he said, "where is God?" I shared with him the secret that keeps me going when I'm tempted to give way to discouragement. I said, "Lualatak, That reminds me of what Mother Teresa once said to a reporter when he asked her, "Where is your God when a child dies hungry in the streets of Calcutta?" Mother Teresa said, "God is with her. The question is, where are you?" James, I said, God is here, and you are here with the children too. We just need others to use their spears in the battle with you. I can hear his voice rising above a roar of complacency that has numbed and frozen his church for far too long. I hear that voice rising through hordes of people like you coming today. And it's just like Gandalf in that scene in Lord of the Rings where the evil dragon is pulling him down to the mire of the cave, and the hobbits and the angels, they're looking at Gandalf, scared to death. Their eyes are screaming, "What do we do?" And he gives them one command: "Follow, you fools." Follow, we fools, if we dare. So, what can you do? Dare to get informed. Sign up for every newsletter that you deem valuable. Read them a half a dozen times. If they don't prove valuable or helpful, unsubscribe. There's only so much you can read. Pick wisely. Choose wisely. Pray about where to connect. Who's really helpful? Who's really serious? Who's pursuing this as kingdom war? Choose wisely. Study our blog, our website. We have not only our propaganda on there, but tons of Christian and secular resources. And secular resources, I beg you do not discount them, because the church has been woefully behind in tracking human trafficking, genocide, persecution, slavery, orphans, just about every social need. We've divided the church between evangelicals and humanitarian do-gooders. God is rectifying that through a good core, but don't be afraid to read the statistics and use the secular resources. And pray about what God would have you do. Today we are giving away free copies of Passport Through Darkness to help get you immersed. We ask you to first know the story and share the story. Every piece of information you have, you are responsible to share. Be a good steward of all that you have. We do ask for donations. If you can't make a donation today, take a book anyway. Know the story, share the story. If there's someone else you know needs to know the story, take one for them as well. They're on the table outside. Passport Through Darkness, let me say, it's not people know I'm a missionary, and so they say, well, is this a missionary book? They know I'm about human trafficking. Is this a human trafficking book? No, it's not either. Although there are some of those stories in it, essentially the book is about how God showed me what my unique role in the kingdom is. And I write that in order to help encourage everyone to know that you too have a unique role. It's not mine. It's not Jen's, it's not Liz, it's not Jim's. Everyone has a unique role in the kingdom, and I'm passionate about helping you discover that. Become a Make-Way Partners or a Miriam's Heart volunteer or representative, an orphans ambassador. Help spread the story. Learn their stories, share their stories. You can go to our website and download a volunteer application. It doesn't matter where you live. We have volunteers all over the country and in several other countries outside of the U.S. You can serve on a short-term mission trip or become a long-term missionary. We have assignments in both Africa, South America. Pray about what God would have you do specifically as your heart is expanding, redefining adoption. Think about this for a minute. We're told that God adopts us, that we are heirs to the throne via adoption. Think of the moment God adopted us, He took us out. He took us home. Our home is not this earth. Our home is glory with Him. If the moment he adopted us, he took us out, where would that leave the world? Where would that leave the church? Apply that concept to orphans who are unadoptable. How can you adopt them? How can you expand your definition of adoption? How can you re-envision what it means like to provide complete care? I'm not talking about making sure they get a cup of rice a day that makes you feel better. I'm not talking about just making sure they have books to go to school. I'm talking about what does it take to build them a home, to have security from slave raiders, to have medical care available, to build their schools, to hire and train their teachers, to make sure they have discipleship. What does that look like? And how can the church be mobilized to provide that whenever government institutions make adoption not an option? Our responsibility as a body does not end where laws prohibit us from doing it in a certain cookie cutter way. We have to think beyond the black and white and the legalities. In the meantime, you can literally save a life today by providing complete care for one of these children. On our website, you can pick the child that you will adopt today that you will never have, may never, unless you go on a short-term mission trip, that you may never have the joy of holding until you're at the feet of Jesus with that child. But to me, that's worth waiting for. While it may be overwhelming to think of 153 million orphans in our world, I want to put it into perspective. Yes, there are 153 million orphans. However, there are 2.1 billion Christians. Who's overwhelmed? 153 million orphans, 2.1 billion Christians. If every Christian family committed to provide complete care for just one orphan, together we could not only end human trafficking, we could solve the world's orphan problem. We have the power to rewrite the rest of the story for millions of orphans. To choose the fate of a child like Teresa, or to have them raised in a loving environment through our personal support. And then by sharing the story with others so that more of the 2.1 billion Christians will wake up and know that they too have the power and the glory to save another and another and another. In just a month, I will be very near to you again. I will be leading a retreat called Our Father's Dream Retreat in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the church, but it's on our website. You'll find it. And again, this is not a missions retreat. This is nothing about Makeway Partners. You might not hear Makeway Partners mentioned all weekend, because that's not what this retreat is about. 3 or 4 times a year, I set aside time. It's sort of like my tithe, to give time to the body of Christ, just helping each and every believer who is hungry to know, to discover what is that unique dream that God held for me in His hands as He knit me in my mother's womb. Life gets in the way. We're born with that glory. A baby is born knowing what it wants. It knows how to cry when it's hungry. It knows how to demand when it wants something. Somehow through life, that gets blocked. Largely, it's called the American dream. We're trained to chase the American dream. Things get in our way. This is a 48-hour interactive experience designed to help you move that clutter aside and discover the unique dream that God held for you in His hands when He first formed you in your mother's womb. So registration, I think you can do it online. Is that right, Audrey? So I hope to see a number of you there. Do we have time for questions?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Why don't you join me up here, because some of the questions may be for
Yeah.
I actually had a question for you, because I often wondered how old is Angel? It makes me cry. How old?
She wants to know how old Angel was. We don't know. There are no birth certificates in Sudan. There are no records of any kind in Sudan, and I had never seen her before. I don't think I had ever seen her before. I don't know where she came from. I don't know where she was trying to go. Looking, and it's hard to tell because she was so emaciated. But looking at her body, I thought she was about 5.
This is our task. This is for us. I use the analogy sometimes that I feel like I put on armor. And I love what you were saying because Lois knows, you guys that work with Miriam's Heart, you know, it's a battle. And this is our battle. This is not comfortable. It's not. It's ugly. It's awful. This is what God has asked us. Thank you. It's what He's commanded us to do. And that's why we felt that your message takes it to a whole new place, right? I mean, it really does take us out of the beauty of adoption and the beauty of foster care, and it brings us into a place where we have to consider, what can the church do? What can the church do? What can I do? What can you do? Because there's more. You know, there's more that can be done. There's more that I can do. There's more that we all can collectively do. And that's really why we wanted to bring her here, because we knew, I've heard you before, and Amanda and I sat and couldn't speak. And I imagine that's sort of where you guys are right now, because we sat and just couldn't speak, because there was just a knowing that hit us, and then that knowing moved us into a place of action and bringing more people to a place of knowing. And then we collectively bring more people to a place of knowing and have action, take action, support organizations that go into the pit. It's a beautiful thing. It's really beautiful. And I just applaud your courage and your candor and just your ability to just share honestly. I love it. I just love it. And I really appreciate you making time and setting aside time to share that, because I know the hush. I've been in the hush moment where I feel like I can't even, my brain is still processing the reality of what you've walked through. And so I just encourage you all, if you haven't had a chance to pick up the book, please pick up the book. If you have the ability to support Makeway Partners, support Makeway Partners. And I thank you for being here and for setting aside this time to share this story with this group of people. Does anybody have any questions?
I'll start out. Can you talk about what unadoptable means? I don't know that we all understand what that means.
Unadoptable is really complex because literally, I'm sure everybody understands the literal definition. It means literally an orphan who is not available for adoption. This happens for many reasons, and it's very complex. It can happen in our own country just because a child has been taken away from his or her parents, for example, because of abuse or instability, severe instability in the home, but the court hasn't actually taken custody from the parents, and so the child is forever sanctioned to foster care. That's an example in our country of how it happens. Pervasively, how it happens I knew that was going to happen. Pervasively, how it happens internationally is either in lawless lands with corrupt governments, or war zones, or places such as Romania, where the government is very complicit, not just complacent, but complicit in human trafficking. They profit hugely by it, and so they have closed the doors for adoption. So and sometimes it's even because our own government places sanctions upon a country. And when our country places sanctions upon another country, that closes the door for visas, including adoption. And And Sudan falls into almost every one of those categories. So let me caveat that by saying some people are extremely critical of orphanages. And I've heard challenging sermons that the church needs to wipe out orphanages. I've heard that preached from mighty pulpits, that it's the church's responsibility to wipe out orphanages. I'm sorry, but that's a very simplistic view that works in our culture and will not work in 90% of the world's cultures. That's an American mentality, and it will not work in most cultures outside of the U.S. Would I want my child raised in an orphanage? No, I'm not going to lie to you. That wouldn't be my first choice. It's not my first choice for the babies in Sudan that I hold and have to leave behind. I've tried to adopt 2 separate children out of Sudan. I've fought really hard to do that, and I couldn't get them out. It couldn't happen. And I have a lot of good contacts. I had congressmen helping me, but I still failed. Couldn't do it. So would I rather that child be in a Christ-centered orphanage with godly people from the U.S. and around the world coming back and forth and checking on them, supporting them, writing them letters, sending them pictures of their family, praying for them every day by name? Yeah, I think that's the best alternative I've been able to come up with so far, but I am wide open.
I was going to say that I think when you're talking about the unadoptable, you're talking about cultures that are infrastructure behind us. So the solutions that Americans have are working here. And closing down orphanages here, that's why that makes sense to us, because we have infrastructure. But what you're talking about is society, and what Jim experienced in Romania is there's a societal and a lack of an infrastructure. So just purely putting 4 walls around and getting children just physically safe is the main goal. It's different. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of thinking because we have to go back and look at history and how God even has taken our culture on a journey in how we care for the orphan and how that our culture even is more open to the concept of, say, open adoption and things like that. And when you're talking about the unadoptable, it's taking, you have to, and I think you do a great job of this, taking us out of this understanding and bringing us into a consciousness of what it's like on the ground in the countries where children can't be adopted.
I want to address the orphanage issue even here inside the U.S. My husband used to be the clinical director for the Presbyterian Home for Children in Alabama, and it was a special treatment program for what was called at that time EC, emotionally conflicted, which 99.9% of the time meant highly traumatized, highly sexually traumatized little girls between the ages. The girls in the group home ranged from 5 to 12. They couldn't be there past 12 years old. So I know the system even here in the U.S. far better than I wish that I did, to be honest. And I will tell you there is one reason why we don't do orphanages in the U.S. anymore. It's not because they will not work. There's one reason. Does anybody have a guess? Money. It's financially driven. They are extremely expensive to do well. Now you can do 1,000 kids in a big ward, really cheap, but that was not politically correct anymore. And to do it right would be really expensive. And you can't pay the house parents $12,000 a year, which is how we did things. They have to be paid, have an honorable income. And we don't want to do that. It's very expensive. And a caveat to the finances are lawsuits, which, all right, you said that's a legal issue, but it all comes back to money. So it's financially driven. It's not because what we do now is a better system.
Right.
I don't think what we're doing now is a better system.
I don't either. I think that the flaw in the system is, I personally believe that it's the lack of the church. Adoption always was a church matter. It was always handled with a soft touch. And so I think it's that lack of God leading and God solving the problem. Because when we take that out of it, then we're just left to our own understanding and studies, which are done after the fact. So how do we correct the mistakes we made 100 years ago when we just studied them now? You know, and I think it's the lack of the church. It was always a church matter, which is why we started Miracle Center, because we felt like we needed to re-engage the church, that this is our matter, not our problem, it's our matter. It's something that God has commanded us to be involved in anti-trafficking, in adoption, in foster care, in missions. This is our business. This is the Father's business. And we are, I was saying to Jim this morning, Jesus says, I call you friends. I don't call you servants. I call you friends. Because a servant doesn't know his master's business. And I love that. I love it. I love it because I love that my Christ calls me his friend.